All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Innovation Bay's Wednesday morning event series. Once again, I'm your host, Ian Gardner. I'm co-founder at Innovation Bay. I'm also a VC. I'm an investment partner with Gelix Ventures. Also, big shout out to our team at Innovation Bay. So, Faden Stow, my co-founder in Hobart, Claire, Sam, CJ, and Alison. We're all working hard to support and connect the startup community across Australia, which we're going to talk much more about today. I'm very excited about this morning. So for those that don't know us, I know there's always some new people each week, so welcome along. Innovation Bay's longest running community group for founders and investors across Australia, and in fact broader than that, but our focus really is on Australia. Our mission is to support founders as they progress their journey from idea to IPO and beyond that. We do this through events, programs, other kinds of content like this, and it's designed to enable people to connect, learn, and grow. So a little bit about Hop-In. A few of you have used it, I'm sure. It's kind of designed to be a little bit like a physical event. So you kind of choose where to go. This is the main stage. We're going to have the panel discussion up here. Once we finish that session, we'll open the networking and you'll be able to join the breakout room. So on the left side of your screen, you'll see a few icons that will go live when we're at the end of the session. It's a lot of fun. You just get to meet some of the audience. I love it because I get to meet you all. Otherwise, I feel I'm just talking to myself. So anyways, it's good fun. So please hang around for that at 9 o'clock. Huge thank you to our sponsors. We couldn't do this without them. So AWS, IAG, Farmark Ventures, KPMG's High Growth Ventures, and Macquarie Bank. They are amazing supporters of Innovation Bay and the whole ecosystem, and they do great work with us and supporting us. So let's give them some love and support. All right, today we are talking about startup communities, which topic very close to our heart. May sound a little bit niche, but it's super important. I mean, the reason Innovation Bay exists is because we want to help people, we want to help founders. Hopefully many of you are doing that. And yeah, this is what we're going to be talking about. So startup communities, many shapes and sizes. You know, you can be a portfolio company, you can be an investor, an accelerator, an incubator, a co-working space, a university. There's membership groups. There's a ton of players in this ecosystem. Community makes the founder journey less lonely, more connected, and dare we say, more successful. I've actually been reading a pretty good book by Brad Feld, still called The Startup Community Way. You know, and there's a few things that I guess we at Innovation Bay were pretty proud of. And the first one really is to keep the founder as the focus on it and also not have a hierarchical structure. And these are some of the things that we've been trying to do. So we will definitely talk about that this morning. So let me stop my slide share. And I'm going to start introducing our panelists. So panelists, if you want to click the join me on stage button, then come on up here and I'll just read a quick bio. Let's start with Topaz. So Topaz Conway. Hi, good morning, Topaz.
Good morning. Good morning.
Director with Startup Oz and Cicada Innovations and many more. Topaz is currently an angel investor in multiple startups across Australia. I think we're a shared investor in a couple, and the USA. You worked in high tech, biotech, manufacturing. You even founded an internet wine company. I actually didn't know that. She's passionate about helping grow and guide entrepreneurs through the journey. So really delighted that you're here to join us this morning, Topaz. Kate Cornick, CEO of LaunchVic, all the way from lockdown in Melbourne. So welcome, Kate. LaunchVic, if you don't know, is the Victorian government's, I think it's $60 million initiative to accelerate startups, drive new ideas and create jobs in Victoria. LaunchVic's working in partnership with entrepreneurs, industry, business, the community and educational institutions to strengthen Victoria's entrepreneurial and startup ecosystem. And, you know, we've done some work, you know, just declaring Innovation Bay as partnering with LaunchVic and a couple of initiatives. So, yeah, we're well across what they've done. And I've had a chat with Kate before at a couple of events. I think you've been in the podcast as well, Kate. So delighted that you're here too. So fantastic panel. Couldn't think of any two people better placed to discuss this. And welcome everyone. So we do want this to be interactive. Over on the right-hand side, there's a chat panel. If you want to ask a question or just have a hello to everyone there, then chuck it in there. All right, look, let's. I might start with you, Topaz. I mean, you know, the intro doesn't do justice to the range of background that you've got. Let me just read something from LinkedIn. I think this might be your words. An entrepreneur, angel investor, director, advisor, mentor, and advocate for the creation of a stronger Australian innovation culture. Look, you've been involved in Springboard, CADA, Startup Oz. Everything about you just oozes startup community. Why are you so passionate about this?
Thanks, Ian. It's self-preservation, actually, because I discovered somewhere in my career, probably in the 90s, that I was totally unemployable. So I was actually an entrepreneur. So that was really the driver when I was in the States. I left Australia in the late 90s and went back to the US and really got thrown head first into the innovation and startup community in Seattle. And it was kind of like finding my tribe, and realized that, that was a culture, a space, a community that really spoke to me, and I fitted in. And so when I came back to Australia after an amazing experience in that ecosystem, I was really passionate about continuing that journey, but in a way that could help. What I discovered when I came back was a community that was kind of without support and without an infrastructure and ecosystem to make being an entrepreneur not only acceptable, but to be able to thrive in that community. So the origins of that I was completely unemployable, and it was self-preservation.
Well, you've made up for it, so he's done a great job since. Look, plenty more to ask you, but let's jump to Kate. Look, I mean, Kate, your LinkedIn background maybe a little more narrow, without trying to be. It's pretty hard to compare yourself with Topaz, but your experience really is around universities and telcos. But you've kind of evolved into this passionate supporter of startups and the whole community around them. So, can you tell us a bit about that journey and why you now love startups as much as you do?
Yeah, well, I think I always did love startups because I did electrical engineering as my undergraduate degree and ultimately a PhD. I started my degree in 1999, right in the middle of the dot-com bubble / bust that happened. And so you couldn't be in telco engineering without understanding what was happening in Silicon Valley at the time. I ended up, as a result of my PhD, which was broadly related to fiber to the premise, I kind of took a wild left turn, having intended to do a startup. And in fact, I did commercialize IP during my PhD, which did get spun out into a startup that was funded by Starfish Ventures out of NICTA. But I took a left turn and ended up in federal politics, being the senior advisor for Stephen Conroy on the NBN. So that then took me down very much a telco operational route. Through that, I ended up back at the university thinking about how one of the things that really concerned me in 2007 was the debate around broadband, and did we need broadband? And for those people that were very close to the debate, there was a real debate about whether you would ever need 20 megabits per second of broadband in the home. And I have to say, if I didn't have such a busy day job, I would go back to all those news articles and all those leaders who said that at that time 10 years ago, many of whom are still active in industry, I might add, because I think it goes to a broader question about policy and where we're heading and how can we as a nation be foresighted. So, here we are today in lockdown. My journey between, running an institute at Melbourne University was then focused on usage of broadband, then, of course, led into mobile apps. And through that, I ended up running my own startup company and did that, had a small exit on the ASX. And the day I decided to hand over the reins, which is a very long story, I was for the job at LaunchVic, and here I am. So I get to support a sector that I have been very passionate about for a long time, and I probably quite consciously set about having a career in startups. I just took a few wild turns along the way.
It would be pretty hard to survive lockdown without broadband, I suspect now. So good on you for holding the line.
We should cut off anyone who said you didn't need 20 megabits per second.
Yeah, that's right. See where they go.
Their broadband and see how they go.
Give them a fax machine. All right, look, so like, I want to ask this question at the sort of top of the show here. And it's around diversity. And there's just more. I mean, it wasn't great. Story came out last week, so it was in the information. I don't know whether you guys saw it, but it talked about a further reduction, and I think it was mostly US numbers, but a further reduction in funding, a percentage of funding that's going to female-founded startups. And I think the reason is that, because you can't get out and meet people, then you're kind of reverting to what you know, and that's, white dudes investing in white dudes, or, I'm paraphrasing a little bit. I just want to talk about this. It's we're all seeing it tough. I mean, Kate, we're involved in trying to set up the Angel Club, and it's so hard to find female angel investors. And again, it's not just the gender question, but there's broader diversity as well. Like, how are we doing as an ecosystem generally to support female founders and investors, and what can we do better? So Topaz, I might start with you, given you've got a Springboard hat and quite a few other hats in this one. So.
Yeah, well, it's a really good question, and I think it's an evolving answer. And the data that's coming out showing the reduction of money going into female founders is upsetting, but not unexpected, because we do default, like you said, to what's comfortable. The other kind of disturbing factor in all of this is, in a COVID-centric kind of workplace, more and more women are working from home. I mean, we're all working remotely, and the family, childcare, trying to homeschool kids and all of that has really put pressure on women. So you've got this kind of double-edged sword. The money's drying up, and the demands of remote working and the logistics of having to be faced with the realities of home life and the realities of running a business from home are getting really increasingly difficult to manage. And so McKinsey came out this morning with a very disturbing statistic that 1 in 3 women are thinking about stepping out of their careers and stepping out of their jobs because it's all too hard. Now that,
that is alarming.
That's alarming, and it does trickle down into the entrepreneurial space. So, I think what that says is that we were making relatively reasonable progress. It's never fast enough. It's never good enough, because we still, women still face the same kinds of issues that they have forever. There are a couple of smaller funds that have popped up, like Eleanor, and for specifically around women-led businesses in the angel space. But really that early stage funding is drying up, I see, and harder for women to access. So it just means that I think we have to pay attention to that, and we have to be even more diligent in calling the money to account for bias. And it's just that I don't want to go backward, another 10 years. And that's what my biggest fear is, that this is going to take a back seat, and we're going to regress to where we were 10 years ago.
And maybe tell us a little bit about Springboard. And I mean, that's the main initiative I think that you've been involved with, but are there others?
Look, there have been a lot of programs that have popped up since Springboard started 10 years ago. And there are certainly a lot of programs for women now. But, the reason Springboard has worked over the years is simply because of the networks and the ability to make introductions and to really, mentor and get those companies to a point where they're very investable. And, at some point, investability and, is what drives the investment. But that road to get there is long and hard and filled with lack of funding. So I don't think there's enough going on. And like I said, Eleanor is a new fund that has, for women-led companies, that has started just recently. And of course, Scale. So those are the two, the two primary ones that I know about. But I just think, I was just on another call this morning about this very issue. And it's until there's a carrot and a stick approach, and it's really hard to do an investment, right? I mean, you can't do that. There's the logic of funding female founders and the success and the impact and the productivity, all of the things that say it's a good business investment to invest in women don't matter. It doesn't change behavior. So I don't have an answer. It's a long way of saying I don't have an answer, but I think we can't let our foot off the pedal, to make change.
Yeah. Kate, what about you in this one? Any insights or observations?
Yeah, so we track this in Victoria, and we have made quite a concerted effort to invest in programs. We've invested in Springboard on multiple occasions. We've invested in Scale, and Ian, as you know, we've invested in Innovation Bay, and your programs will have gender targets around the work that you do. So we're very conscious of providing programs that support women only, as well as making sure every program that's supported by LaunchVic has a very strong attention to detail around gender. We're seeing good and bad happening. So the bad is that our percentage of female founders peaked a couple of years ago at 28% of women, and it's now shrunk to 20%. We're not glad about that. That's something that we're very worried about. The underlying driver of that is also to do with the fact that LaunchVic has tightened its definition of what a startup is. So we're now very much focused on technical companies. So a lot of the companies that were e-commerce companies, food manufacturing companies, etc., are no longer fit part of our definition because we've aligned globally with Startup Genome and their definition. So there's definitely a lot of work to do, and we've got to, it goes right back to STEM education for women and making sure more women consider technical degrees. And I certainly know from my experiences doing electrical engineering, I was one of less than 5% when I did my PhD. I was the only woman in the PhD cohort. So there are challenges there. The positive side is we're actually, and we take some credit for this at LaunchVic, we're seeing an increase in funding flowing to women. So for deals under $1 million in Victoria, women are attracting 32% of those deals, which is disproportionate to the number of female founders that are in the network. And I think a big part of that is the work that we've done through LaunchVic, both advertently and inadvertently, to really bring the investor landscape along on a diversity discussion. And, all hats off to the likes of Rampersand that have got very, very strong diversity programs running and are really very cognizant of the issues around here. When you get to women for deals over $1 million, that number falls off, but then so does the candidate pool. So we're very focused on how do we get more female founders into the ecosystem, because if you haven't got the women in this ecosystem, the investors can't find them to invest in. And that seems to be where the problem's at in Victoria, because we do have an overrepresentation of women invested compared to men at this point in time, which is a good thing to have at very early stage. But it doesn't take away from the fact that there is a small pool, and it's a diminishing pool as you get into later stage. So I think there is definitely a lot of work to be done, and it's why we've recently launched 2 pre-accelerators, one of which is Springboard, specifically to help women conceptualize an idea. So it's not just I've got an idea, how do I grow it? It's how do I actually start? Like I've got an inkling, how do I get going?
Yeah, I think that's a punchline. There's a lot of work to be done. So, but I think together we just got to keep the laser focus on it and keep talking about it and keep doing initiatives and calling it out as a challenge. Mm-hmm. Kate, I might stick with you, just a little more color maybe on LaunchVic, because in some ways it's quite a unique organization. It's been around, must be four or 5 years now. You've been in charge for the whole time, so you've obviously seen it evolve and carved it out, and I guess painted it in your colors in many ways. So, what is LaunchVic, and what is your mandate to support the startup ecosystem?
Yes, I always worry when people say paint it in your colors, because if anyone knows LaunchVic, our colors are pink, and pink is not my most favorite color, but we do stand out in market, and we definitely don't look government. So that's that's part of our branding. So we're a private company, but we're sponsored entirely by government. So we effectively are a quasi-government agency that's responsible for growing the startup ecosystem. And the benefit of that structure is that we get to be a little bit riskier, a little bit more nimble than government can be, and really make investments that are going to challenge the growth of the ecosystem and accelerate that. So we've invested primarily to date in very early stage, so accelerators, pre-accelerators, education programs. We've started to move into the angel investor landscape recently. As Ian just pointed out, we've recently launched 4 new angel networks this year. We launched one last year as well. And we're also very...
On that, just before you continue, and what's the thinking behind the angel network stuff?
So the thinking behind that was that really one of the big challenges, and a big part of our work is researching the ecosystem. A couple of years ago, one of the really big challenges was our investor landscape. So we were actually growing at 25% per annum over the last 4 years, which is phenomenal growth in terms of founders, mostly men, but we are growing as an ecosystem very, very strongly. But there was a really big gap in early stage capital. And what we've seen happen is late stage capital that once played in early stage has got bigger and bigger limited partners coming into their funds. And what that means is they need to make bigger and bigger checks. So they're moving later and later stage. So while the overall venture capital market is increasing, what we're seeing is more money flowing to late stage deals, which is leaving a gap in early stage. So 2 years ago, we had Startup Genome do some research with us. It uncovered about $100 million shortfall in seed and Series A funding in market that was in 2018. We then had Professor Josh Lerner from Harvard Business School come over and do some additional research that substantiated that and also built out some mechanisms, one of which was the fact that we really didn't have very many angel networks in Australia. And that is an Australian-wide problem. If you look at cities like Berlin and Barcelona, I'm not comparing ourselves to Silicon Valley. We're not that size. We need to compare ourselves to growing ecosystems. They would have on average about 18 angel networks per city. In Melbourne in 2018, we had 2, Scale Angels and Melbourne Angels, both fantastic networks, both with very different offerings. And we really wanted to see diversification in the early stage investment market and provide an opportunity to allow capital to flow. One of the benefits of, in particular, Melbourne is that we have a lot of high net worth individuals. We have a lot of cash. Family offices, there is cash. And one of the things that was really frustrating me was, well, 2 of the things. One was I was talking to family offices who were saying, well, this is philanthropy and we treat this as a philanthropic investment. Well, if you're coming to a startup with a philanthropic investment mindset, you're not actually helping that company achieve its maximum potential. So that was concerning. And the other thing we saw was a lot of people saying, I've invested in one startup, I put $1 million behind it, it failed, and I'm never touching that sector again. And that's lost capital. That's not the way to invest intelligently. So we need to provide education, which we do through Scale Invest Ed program, through VC Catalyst at the Wade Institute, as well as networks that are going to help support investors to make the best possible investments they can. And, you know, there's something to be said for many minds around a table looking at a startup deal. We definitely believe in that. And so that's why we've chosen to support angel networks. Yeah.
And sorry, I feel there was maybe 1 or 2 more things that you were going to say LaunchVic did before I interrupt.
Yes. Angel networks, we're playing in that space. We're increasingly looking at the scale-up space as well. And I think that goes again back to the gender challenge. We want to encourage early stage. We want to get more female founders, but how do we also help those founders be as successful as they can be to transition? And that ultimately is about getting great exits, growing great businesses, creating new jobs, and that will then start to create a virtuous cycle. Because once we have got that, large number of companies being successful, very successful entrepreneurs in the ecosystem, successful workers at startups, successful investors, the ecosystem will start to sustain itself, and then there should be no need for the likes of a LaunchVic. Yeah. And at the end of the day, every ecosystem, including Silicon Valley, has received substantial government support to keep going. once they have got going, like Silicon Valley, government can take a back seat. And that's really the vehicle that LaunchVic's playing. So if we do our job really well, we shouldn't exist in 10 years' time.
I'm sure you'll find something else productive to do. So yeah, that's a noble aim. Topaz, let's talk about immigration. I think it was 2 years ago, Innovation Bay runs a big Christmas event. So our last event of the year, we had 200 people in the room in Sydney. And I asked the question, show of hands, who in the audience was not born in Australia? And it was about 70% of the audience put their hand up, which I thought was, now, again, we haven't done a broader survey, but, my suspicion is it's certainly over 50%. So, I mean, you, like me, we're both immigrants. Kate, I think you're English originally, so we're all immigrants here. I mean, how important is immigration in building a vibrant ecosystem, Topaz?
Well, it is all about diversity of thought and experience, right? And we all know what the data says about diversity in anything, whether it's a workplace, a culture, a society. And I remember when I first came to Australia, my parents migrated here in the 80s, and sort of late 80s, I'd come and visit a lot from the States, and the one thing I noticed was the food in Australia was really crap. I mean, it was, you could not.
You haven't been to Scotland, Topaz? Haggis next time.
Yeah, well, it's all about food for me. But I did notice that it was probably a lot like, the UK as far as food in those days.
I think you're right.
When I moved then in the 90s, I moved here. And as we went through that decade of the 90s, suddenly food became more interesting, more diverse, and it mattered to people. And a whole industry was developed in Sydney around food. And I think about that, right? I think about what that has added to the Australian lifestyle, the culture, how people live, how people eat, the whole movement around food and good food was immigrant inspired. It had nothing to do with Australians kind of getting there on their own. It had to do with different kinds of thought coming into the food chain. And it's no different in an ecosystem. The more diversity of experience, diversity of thought, of how your customer base, every time somebody comes into Australia, we bring a knowledge of a customer base, a global customer base that Australia doesn't have, because it's not the same. I was the classic coming into Australia thinking, oh, everything will be fine. Everybody speaks English. I come from the US. I'm coming into Australia. How hard can that be? I've lived all over the world, and the biggest culture shock and adjustment I have ever had to make was moving to Australia. So, there's just a lot we can learn from people who come from different areas, and we do bring different perspectives. And you can see in the last 10 years how that's affected the startup ecosystem in how we think, how we operate. There was no ecosystem 10 years. Really, now there is a robust ecosystem that is modeled not on Silicon Valley, but on a global source of information and experience and models. So I think it's critical. I think it's hugely important.
And I mean, I'm not sure that the government's got it quite right when one of the standout bits of the Crossroads report every time, and you're obviously part of Startup Oz, so you're across it, but the desire of the community to make the visa allocation easier, and it just doesn't seem to be happening. Is it any movements in that? Any further insights from the inside the tent at Startup Oz?
Look, I wish there was some really good news about that. It's unfortunately, what happens in government is the blinkered approach, especially when there's economic crisis or political crisis going on, both of which we're experiencing right now. And so a lot of the really critical issues around building up a diverse workforce through immigration is taking a back seat in all the other discussions that seem to be going on. The disconnect with government seems to be more around not understanding what that diversity of experience, especially the deeper experience that you get, because we're so new to this whole space. We're so new to building technology as a core business, a core economic part of our country. But so our experience levels are going to be often less than what we see overseas with people who have built multiple companies and done global companies. So it's both on the ground technical and market. It doesn't matter. It's not just technical. You know, I know there's a big push around, we need more programmers, we need more STEM, we need more, you know, the technical people, but you know, no business is run only with technical people. So we need that diversity of experience of growing companies, selling, marketing, you name it. I think the point that's being missed is that it's not just, you can't verticalize it into very specific technical skills.
The chat room is remarkably quiet this morning. I must just be tuning in and listening to our great conversation. But folks, if you have a question for the panel, please stick it in there and we will get to it. Kate, let me ask you maybe a different question, you know, really around the lockdown. I mean, how long has it been now? 3 months?
Yes, something like that. I think I've lost track, but yes.
I mean, it's
time.
It must be brutal. So, I mean, we I don't know whether it's a good thing to speak to people from Sydney and South Australia and wherever else, you know, because it might cheer you up or depress you. I'm not sure which, but anyway, we share or we give you good vibes. It's probably, you know, we can't share your pain because you're the one that's living in it. I mean, the question is really around how the severe lockdown has affected LaunchVic and the startup ecosystem, because obviously no one could get out to do events. No one's been hanging around with each other. I mean, there's not too many events going on in Sydney either, by the way. But I mean, how's the local ecosystem from your point of view been responding to COVID, and what else can we do to support startups?
Yeah, I think on one level, it's very individual, because at the end of the day, you know, there are a lot of people with mental health issues, and, you know, ranging from major mental health issues to just feeling a bit stir crazy. And, you know, that is impacting the entire community here.
I think I heard that this morning on the news. The percent increase was terrible.
Yeah, and you can definitely see that. And, you know, the energy is a bit lower. In terms of how, you know, everyone's on their own individual journey in this, and people will respond in different ways. I think I've probably been on the slightly more optimistic side, which I have been accused many times in my life of being an over-optimist. But I think that, you know, there are companies that are doing unbelievably well in this environment. You know, the move to online has accelerated their business. They've had growth that they couldn't possibly have imagined in January for 2020. And I think that's incredibly exciting for those startups that are in those areas and have got businesses that are growing. There are also a slew of startups and indeed community organizations that are really struggling in this environment. And, you know, particularly the people that have run events, businesses, and that goes to the community builders, as well as startups that are in sectors that are deeply affected. For example, hospitality, their customer base has completely dropped away, and that's incredibly challenging for those businesses and very, very stressful. At the most macro level, I think, you know, as a sector, if we, the technology sector, high growth, innovative, disruptive companies cannot survive and thrive in this period, we, you know, at a macro level, we are the companies that are going to shape the future of our economy. And so I think there is also something a little bit Darwinian that's going on as well around survival of the fittest. Paul Bassett has come out and said there has never been a better time to invest. When there are times of massive disruption, there is times of massive upheaval. That is when our community, the entrepreneurs, should be frothing at the mouth to tackle those challenges head on, and they are being thrown up left, right, and center. So one of the things that, you know, I would certainly encourage startups that are in, you know, maybe there are companies that have been bubbling along for a few years, haven't quite found product market fit, haven't got investment, haven't got revenue. You know, we should be encouraging our startups to think about, is this the best company for you to be focusing your precious time on? Because there might actually be a better opportunity facing you right in the face right now. And we don't know what the world's going to look like in a year, 5 years, 10 years. But what we do know is it's going to look very, very different from 2019. And that creates tremendous opportunity. And so extended lockdowns are incredibly painful, but they're also giving us an opportunity to really come to understand how the world can work. And the reality is, I'm very proud of my team at LaunchVic and the way we seamlessly transitioned online within 2 hours and have worked at the same pace, same productivity for many months now. And, it does affect you. You don't meet your colleagues. You don't get to see people face to face, and you can't say it doesn't affect you. But there are some great things that we've done in lockdown, including funding our angel networks, which, is probably one of the programs I'm most proud of at LaunchVic. So I think we have to recognize it's an intensely difficult time for a lot of people. We also have to flip the coin and say, this is a moment of tremendous opportunity. And this sort of shift is the shift that is going to change the world. And we have an opportunity to change our economies if we want to grasp it. And I am hell-bent passionate about that.
That answer should be captured and written down. That was brilliant and such a positive outlook. So it's one of the things I love about you, Kate, is just that positivity that oozes all the time. And I think it's all true as well. I think it is a great time to be a startup and to be investing. There's tough parts to that too, but out of COVID, tech is certainly one of the winners, and I think that will continue. So, Topaz, let me maybe change tack a little bit and talk about the sort of peer-to-peer aspect of communities. One thing Innovation Bay has been doing for the last year and a half now with our Summit Club, which is our Series A and beyond founders, is to get founders helping other founders, because that's really the best support you can get, because the only people that really understand the issues of a startup are other startup founders generally. That's overgeneralizing, but what's your view in this, and how can we foster and encourage this more broadly?
I think that peer-to-peer is incredibly important for all the reasons you just said, and certainly in Springboard, one of the most powerful parts of that program is the alumni. We call it the alumni network, which is, the CEOs, the founders all stay in touch, and they all become part of this large group of, about 1,000 alum all over the world. And it is the ability to talk about those really hard things that you can't talk to your staff about, you can't talk to your board about necessarily, because nobody wants to be, to expose themselves, at that level. And it just gives you a place to go for a sanity check, just to say, no, I'm not crazy. No, I'm not, overreacting. No, I'm not, whatever, fill in the blank. So I think those peer-to-peers are incredibly important, and what you've done at Innovation Bay is a great example of why that works. I think the other part of that, the other side of that is, not the other side, in addition to that, I think it's incredibly important to bring in the mentor level network, the ability to bring in people who, to avoid this blind leading the blind kind of problem, to make sure that there's maturity within that peer network, and all levels of experience, all levels of multiple entrepreneur experiences, serial founders, whatever you want to call it. But it's balancing that out with really good next stage aspirational kind of representation and advice at the same peer-to-peer kind of format, I think is really important.
And Kate, has LaunchVic supported any peer-to-peer approaches like this?
Yeah, we have. We certainly, we've supported Innovation Bay and
yeah, thank you.
You certainly encourage mentorship and connection. We've recently supported Startup Victoria to run a startup success series, which is really looking at both very, very early stage and as well as a growth club, which is later stage. So bringing those founders together. And I think Topaz is exactly right. We want to avoid the blind reading the blind, and the people that have the best on the ground experience are the founders. And we certainly encourage founders to reach out to other founders at the same stage. I think one of the problems when I first started was mentorship's always something that comes up whenever we do a consultation, and people always want their mentor to be the person at the top of the ecosystem. They want to be mentored Anna Brooks or Paul Bassett or Lee Jasper, our chair at LaunchVic. And those people have minimal time, but they've also spent 20 years growing a business or 10 years growing a business. So they're very disconnected from where you are at. And actually the person that's probably most experienced and could help, some of the people that can help you are people directly in your peer group. So I think there's also a perception issue. And I think there's also something and Topaz might have more insights on this. I've lived in the US and I'm from the UK. I think there's something quite shy about Australians, that they don't want to reach out and ask for help. In America, people just are in your face. If you do something good, my startup had an office in New York. The minute we did something good, people would just reach out to you, go, hey, like what you do, can we catch up for a coffee? I've got this problem, please help me solve it. And in Australia, we kind of dance around, let's have a coffee catch up, maybe, and people don't actually like asking for, I've got this problem, please help me. It's let's catch up, or maybe the conversation doesn't even start. So I think there's something cultural in this that we have in Australia. Maybe it's tall poppy syndrome. I'd be really interested in Topaz's insights here.
That is such a good point, and it's so salient, because that was one of the things when I had my startups in the States and came back to Australia. Nobody would even admit they were an entrepreneur, never mind ask for help. And I think it is a cultural thing. And, and that celebration of the little things, of the little wins, of the, and wanting to be a part of that and wanting to help that along. It's, when I had my businesses in the States, it was people were coming to me and saying, how can I help? How can I, can I introduce you to so-and-so? Can I, throw some money in? Or, go girl, pour me some more wine. So it's a very different kind of attitude. And that kind of belief and that kind of support and that kind of just the action of saying, how can I help? And being in your face about that makes you stronger as an entrepreneur. It just propels you into having that confidence that you can actually do this. And so we are missing that. And that's part of that cultural thing that I've talked about, for a very long time, about how we have to actually, as a culture, shift how we treat and view and support our entrepreneurial It's not building an ecosystem that is in isolation of our culture. That it's reflected in how the government doesn't support entrepreneurism or our innovation. We don't we don't drink our own Kool-Aid. I don't know what that's about, but we don't trust our own technologies. We have to wait till they're validated overseas and bring it back, and then we trust them. So, so it's a very big challenge, and glad you brought that up, Kate.
Maybe just some more insight from us on this. The reality is that most founders know intuitively that they should be building a network, but the problem is they're busy, and they're prioritizing their staff, their customers, their investors above building peer relationships. So, and it's really hard. As you get older in particular and busier, it just becomes harder to build a meaningful relationship. So, because you need people that you can trust and that you respect and you can be vulnerable with. And those are really hard, So in some ways, what we've tried to do is to almost using quote marks here, artificially structurally bring them together in a bit more of in a structured manner. And that has worked. And it came from some insights, after some of our physical events, there's one particular in Melbourne, one in Sydney. We do this thing called community coffee, where we just get 10 people together, and, there's a bit of structure to it. So everyone got a chance to share a problem. In both cases, the groups that we brought together completely randomly stayed together. So they continued to meet month after month after that first 1 hour session that we did in the local cafe. And that's like, oh my God, this is incredibly powerful. So I definitely encourage, this is, I think, a core part of building a great community, which is to build your tribe. And that is people that you can like and respect and trust and hang out with. So, all right, well, there's a question in from Rob Fitzpatrick. Hey, Rob, he knows a lot about this stuff too. What does he say? Given this topic, what is missing from our ecosystem? we seem to have collectively built a lot of aspects in the past decade. A lot of these are serendipitous, maybe. Well, that's probably true, actually. Should or can we plan more systematically? Kate, I think you're doing a lot of this, but any insights on moving beyond this serendipity into something a bit more planned?
Yeah, and hi, Rob. I haven't seen Rob with the benefit of, or the and not benefit of lockdown, as you don't see people. But I think for me, the biggest issue we've got is the investor issue. I spoke to that without a doubt. Our ecosystem prior to COVID was growing very rapidly. I have great confidence that our entrepreneurs are going to respond to this, and we'll continue to see that growth. So investor ecosystem. The second one for me is industry translation from universities, which is very much part of my bailiwick, and I can talk on this topic for hours, as I think Ian and Rob both know. I think, at the end of the day, we've got an engine in our universities which is world class. Our research is frequently at the top of the pack. Our commercialization is at the bottom of the pack, and I think we keep looking at universities, and it's one of the reasons I went back to a university to work, was to try to tackle this problem. I think the more I've worked in and around universities, I sit on a council of a university, it's got to be done from the outside in, and we've got to create a completely different way of doing it, because we keep nutting away at the issue in small little chips, and it hasn't paid off yet. We've got to do something really different, but we also have to recognize that this is something that most universities struggle with. There are examples like Cambridge University in the UK, Stanford and MIT in the US. They are the exceptions, not the rules, but I don't think that means we give up on that, because if we can't quantify how important research is to us, government will keep reducing the amount of funding that gets put into research, and that then inhibits our long-term potential as a nation, not on a 10-year cycle, but probably a 30 to 50-year cycle. So for me, I'm very passionate about the need to support research, and I'm very passionate about entrepreneurship. And they are both interrelated, and we haven't connected them well in Australia, and we have to keep trying. We certainly have some programs that are experimental through LaunchVic. MID Talent Pathways is one. And we have to rethink, through that, we're rethinking what the PhD cohort is, and how we can engage the PhD cohort to be better conduits for research translation. But we do have to do things differently.
Topaz, you've been pretty involved in, I just want to double click on that deep tech, and, we're great at research, but bad at commercialization. You're involved at Cicada. I don't know how you pronounce it. So that's question one, how do you pronounce it? Question two, any insights around this, lack of commercialization skill?
Yeah, well, I think it's a well acknowledged issue in Australia, what Kate has just shared. We have amazing research coming out of our universities. We're punching globally at the top and punching globally at the bottom, with the commercialization side of that. I think that's Cicada is how you say it, or how I say it. Cicada is really founded on this whole idea that there should be a way of making sure that deep tech, which is research out of universities, is nurtured and incubated as long as it needs to be in order to get to market. The disconnect is that research, to commercialize that research, takes time. It takes long. It's not a software play. It's usually something that requires a lot more development time than the average tech company. And so understanding that is a big deal. I'm also involved with UNSW and UTS on a number of things. And Kate, I'd love your thoughts on this. The entire university economics have been disrupted with COVID. And I think that's not going away. And they're all having to really undo everything that they assumed. And even though they knew this was coming, nobody prepared for it. And so the opportunity that this is all presenting for universities, how do you think that's going to pan out? Because for me, it just seems like this is the prime time to understand, to bring that external, to bring that industry focus into the research world, and they're going to have to look at different ways of funding and different ways of managing student output, or the employability of students. Do you see any shifts in that from where you sit?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think certainly the university sector as a whole is in turmoil at the moment, and their business models, the rug's been pulled out from underneath. Yeah. They have to rethink. I think there are some universities, and I'm involved with at least one, that I think are very well positioned for this environment for historical reasons. They've taken a different approach. I think there are other universities that are really going to struggle, and their funding has been so reliant on cross-subsidization, particularly of international students into research. So their surplus funds come from international students. That then gets used to do great research, and that research then it has great impact in AAA rated journals, but doesn't necessarily commercialize. We've got to find a better way of doing that, and I think there's going to be some real challenges. I think one of the things that I am very concerned about is the number of researchers that are predicted to become unemployed. And I think there's an onus on how do we reskill those people, because these are exceptionally smart people who deeply understand a field. But I think for too long we've assumed that the researcher mindset is an entrepreneur's mindset. We're all innovation professionals. And there's a reason I stepped out of being a researcher. My very first job for a very short amount of time was as a researcher. After my PhD, and I realized that was not for me, because I'm not that attention to details. I'm much better a CEO than I would be a researcher, and they're two very different people types that you need. And I'm grossly generalizing here, but I think we do need to really very radically upskill our very deeply intellectual and knowledgeable workforce, so that they can transition in some way, shape, or form. And I noticed Faden. I think it just put a comment in the chat about, we need to think about how our academics with tenure are able to spin out without giving up their university degree. And this goes to the heart of culture in a university. It goes to the heart of performance management university. And these are the things that universities need to be looking at, as well as how do we bring in industry dollars. I think there will be some universities who will do this really well. There will be others that will really struggle in this environment, and there will be a shake-up in this environment. We have 39 universities, and I think in 1 to 2 decades there won't be that number.
Yeah, I would concur with all that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a linked question which came in from my better half here, Andrea, who's literally 2 meters away at the other end of the table. She probably should have jumped up and jumped in the mic here, but and it's around, how do we keep Australian tech in Australia? Because we've seen examples of China trying to almost poach tech. I mean, maybe a bit different now, but any insights on how we? Yeah, she doesn't realize there's a 10-second delay. How do we keep Australian tech in Australia? Topaz, I might throw that to you.
Yeah, well, that's always been the problem with the way things have been for entrepreneurs in Australia, and that issue that I mentioned earlier, which is that we don't trust our own entrepreneurs, our own technology and innovators, and we expect them to be validated somewhere else. We're much more apt to adopt an overseas technology before our own, and that's a real problem, because anybody who wants to build a global company then wants to take it overseas, where they're going to be embraced by that very culture that we were talking about earlier of, wow, you're doing that? That is so cool. How can I help? So, we're up against that is one of the ramifications of this cultural shift that we need to keep working on. That was, that cultural shift is what I was really passionate about when I came back to Sydney in the late 2000s after being in the States. Is that we have to culturally shift how we think about it, how we treat entrepreneurs, how we treat our own technology. So China is a more complex issue when it comes to stealing, taking technologies or stealing technologies, however you want to look at it. And I know there are real realities around that sort of cyber invasion into university research. But it is a very complex issue, but the complexity is more around how do we value that? How do we value what we're doing here and keep that value, support that value financially as well as culturally, and put more money into the ecosystem, the government putting more money into supporting the ecosystem, which then encourages people to keep their companies here. And some do it in spite. I mean, we've got great examples, of Atlassian stayed here forever, Canva's still here. There's a lot of our bigger companies have bit the bullet and stayed. But the government seems to be pulling away the support of that has allowed companies to stay in Australia and still be global more than they did even 6 years ago.
Yeah. All right. I'll keep my eye on the clock here. It's 8:58, and I always pride myself on staying on time. So I think we might call an official end to the proceedings. Topaz, Kate, that was awesome. I really enjoyed chatting to you, and I think the audience hung around and hopefully took something from this. So yeah, look, thanks again. I think this was a great panel, and this should last the test of time once we've posted it in our YouTube channel. So what I might do is ask the two of you to skedaddle off the stage. Hopefully you can hang around for the networking, and I'll just do a quick wrap up and tell the audience what else is going on. So thank you guys, but if you click the leave button, let me share my screen. All right, so what we're going to do is, I think Claire's already opened it. So on the left-hand side, you'll see that the sessions and networking are now open. So you can jump in there and enjoy. So the sessions is like, being at a table with up to 9 people, but you can also stand in the shadows behind the table and just listen in if you want. And networking's more one-to-one. I don't know how many people we're going to get hanging around, so the one-to-one may be a little light in numbers, but hopefully we'll get some good take-up in the session. So come and join us. I think Kate certainly said she was going to hang around, and hopefully Topaz as well. What else have we got coming up? So next week, we have a panel talking about the best way to build an angel investment portfolio. So we've got Trevor from Investible, Ariane from Scale that we talked about this morning, and Luke Fay, who runs Artesian's venture arm. We should also call out, we have agritech. So if you're an agritech startup or know someone who is, we've got a bunch of events coming up that we're going to be focusing that sector around investors in our angel group. So if you're looking for funding or advice or anything else, then check that one out. I think it's on the website and Twitter. We launched an episode last week with Melissa. Melissa, you may have known as being one of the managing partner at NAB Ventures. She's now moved on. She's joined the portfolio company. Most people in that, it's kind of the traffic tends to go the other way. So you go from entrepreneur to venture, but Melissa's gone the other way. So she's back in the trenches. So she's a CEO at Lighter Capital, which is an awesome alternative lending business. So check that one out. Episode 98. So we've got 99 coming out this week. I think Faden's doing that recording. And then Faden and I will do something a little bit special for the 100th episode. So keep your eye on that in a couple of weeks. Thank you again to our sponsors, AWS, IAG, Farmark, KPMG's Hagworth Ventures, and Macquarie Bank. So thank you all so much for that. Look, I've been at Ian Gardner. I'm not Innovation Bay. I am Ian Gardner. I'm the host here. So we're here to support you. Hopefully we'll see you in the chat. And thanks for joining.